All the best then, Dan.
Thank you very much. Didn't realise it was streaming live on YouTube.
It's unlisted.
It's just good morning still for those of you who are joining us. Just bear with us. We hope to get going as soon as we can. We just wait for people to join. Whilst you're joining, you probably can find in your Zoom bar a chat menu. It would be great if you could share with us your name and where you're from, and even what you may like to get out of today. So thank you from William to say hi all. If William, you'd like to share where you're from, and that would be great. Other people could then get to know you a bit better. So beginning to fill up nicely. For those of you just joining, please do use the chat pane to tell us where you're from, so other people who are here can get a feel of who's there with them. And please do use the chat pane if you would like to say what you'd like to get out of today. Thank you to Richard for sharing his background. Phil's just said afternoon all. Going to give us a bit more information, Phil. That would be great. We'll just give it, for those who are still joining, there's people just beginning to trickle in still. So we'll give it one more minute before we get going. For those of you new to Zoom, there's three key things you need to know. Firstly, the chat pane. A number of you have found that. Dan is going to take questions as we go along, if we can, or certainly at the end. So if you'd like to ask questions, please use the Q&A menu. And if you would like to put your name in there, I can make sure that you can actually ask this question live and hopefully get involved in a discussion around your question. As we go to the second part, after Dan's presentation, we may also start to use the hands up facility that you will see. If you want to ask a question but don't want to write it at that point, if you put your hands up, I can bring you in live. That means that you can certainly open your microphone and ask a question. If you want to share your camera as well, that would be great. So I think without much more ado, what we'll do is get going. And for all of those of you sharing your information, thanks, that's absolutely great. For those of you who this may be the first session, this is part of a series that Construction Excellence and its partners has been running for the last over 3 months now during the COVID crisis. And twice a week, we have different speakers talking on different topics. This week, we have an MMC sort of special, in the sense that Dan's going to be talking today about build, build, build. And on Friday, we have a session from the Welsh Government Department, who have been looking at MMC from the standpoint of social and housing in South Wales. So I think we're now happily all in. So we're still filling up. But for those of you who join a little bit late or have friends or whatever, you can catch up fully with today's session, either by going to our website or Constructing Excellence, where you can listen again, and you'll be able to also see Dan's slides. So I think we'll now ask Dan if he's quite happy to begin. Are you there, Dan?
I am indeed. Thank you very much.
Over to you then. Thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, John. Good morning or good afternoon now, everybody. And thanks for attending, as Howard said, the MMC Build, Build, Build the MMC Way. webinar. So just to give you a bit of background, I'm Dan Macy, recently set up Holistic Housing Solutions, I think from the frustrations of seeing MMC's approach to the current marketplace. So I've experience through the construction industry, predominantly in the supply chain now for a number of years, from building merchants to specialist supply chain manufacturers. My last sort of 12 years I've spent in the world of facades, and now moving into looking at that more holistic approach. So it's great to see everybody on board. And as I said, we welcome you and hope you get some information from this. So please feel free, you know, plenty of questions, don't be afraid. Many times I wish I asked questions and never got round to it. So please keep them coming in. But we'll whiz through a presentation. I'll keep my eye on the chat room. I'll keep my eye on the Q&A and seeing if we can go through this nice and smoothly with you. So if you just bear me 1 second whilst I set you up the screen. Okay, so John, Howard, are we okay there? Are we all good? Seeing
I can see it all. Yeah, I can hear you.
Thanking you. Right, so basically, we're all very familiar now with our construction industry, some pains and gains of where we're at in this industry. And I think as probably our Andrew Carpenter, who's not with us today, will constantly refer to in Constructing Excellence webinars of the Latham and Egan reports. There are many other reports in circulation, some of which obviously are up on the screen here now, looking at the modern method of construction, looking at obviously the housing market and how these modern method of construction solutions would assist. Most recently, we obviously have Mark Farmer, and Mark's really captured this market in his front cover, really. So Modernise or Die, it's just showing that obviously we need to look at innovation in today's world. So examples across the world of what others are doing. The UK market, I would say, has been a little slow to accept. We've all been and seen post-construction or post-war constructions of system-built houses, and perception in the world of modern methods of construction is very different to many people. So it's getting that understanding and the definitions of what is and what isn't. And is it new? Is it innovative? You know, or are we just adapting traditional solutions to become innovative? So a typical example, you got Tokyo, and obviously the capacity to build more than what the UK has, with Japan's embracement of the use of offsite and MMC, with Sweden coming in with 45% of their homes. You know, ambitious targets through China. Sorry, I'm going to go back one. I've jumped the gun there. Ambitious targets to obviously achieve a 30% in 2026. And then things of Singapore's nature with all developments, if they are on government land, we'll be looking at the use of modular construction. And probably a lot of us are very familiar anyway with Germany and their sort of carbon positive approach and high quality. So passive house, Emma, I know you've logged in. So the guru there of passive house, an understanding of that. So from the UK's perspective, recent statistics that I've been accustomed to shows a roughly about 8% usage, which I find very difficult to ascertain how that's been achieved, because obviously have the definitions of modern methods of construction really been quantified in the right way. However, the positive side of it is that the anticipated growth over the next coming years is going to put that 8% up to 20%. So we are starting to see more and more acceptance of that approach as we go. You can just bear with me. So we're in a crisis. I'm just trying to ensure that we've got participants here. We've got 62, so that's great. And when they're not falling at the moment, I just need to make sure that I can see your questions and answers as we go. So apologize for slowing you down here a second. So from a time of the crisis, we're looking at the housing crisis as it is. We all know the shortages. Every conference we go to, I don't want this to be a mundane approach for you. We see the numbers. We know we're not hitting them. We're barely hitting half of them. So being able to achieve them and pick up the deficit on the fall is a very difficult task in itself. Whilst we're obviously looking at the housing crisis, there is a climate change crisis at the same time. And within the construction industry, we're obviously looking at now the zero carbon homes approach for 2050. We've got a lot of activity happening now lately with decarbonisation in the construction industry, and as we've all experienced, our changes, drastic changes to sort of want the better word of COVID, and the future impact that COVID is going to have on us now going forward. So if the one thing that I have learned during COVID is it's never a bad time to have a beer now. There's never a right time, so it's all good. Don't you worry about it. Oh, sorry, we're not moving on here, John. Oh, we are. So from Rishi Sunak and the spring budget of 2020, I think it goes without saying, we are very welcoming these numbers. It's a very positive sign. Where the money's coming from is another thing, but it's very positive to see that there's an estimated £665 billion over a period of time that's been or will be ploughed into our industry. In many sectors as well. So we're not just looking at modern method of construction of housing, for instance. You know, this does span across all sectors of our industry. You know, retrofit being a recent one that's came out now, looking at existing housing stocks and how they can be enhanced and bring up the performance of their energy efficiencies, which ultimately also look at fuel poverty. So absolutely welcome that to our industry, and hopefully there are many construction companies that see this and welcome it also, because we are seeing sadly redundancies taking place very soon after COVID, and hope this will kind of revive some of those aspects to stop any further. So whilst we have a significant value, we have significant numbers, we also have missing pieces, and we might have this build approach. However, we have a very stretched value chain, and by value chain I mean in the materials and the skills, from a capacity, from a supply issue. So from a conventional traditional construction, we need to obviously take a good assessment and review how many we need to build, what we can build within the capacity of what we actually have, and making sure that the capacity we do have equally has the skill sets and the quality to build it in the manner in which we wish to have it built in. So additionally, another further missing pieces that we've heard, and William, I did see, thank you for your honesty, was I'm a planner, so my apologies in advance. But the planning processes and policies, so not necessarily the planners, but the processes and the policies are very strict and very stringent with the ranging approaches that we have to take. So there have been many organizations who have the capabilities, who have the ability. Planning is great in the aspects that, you know, we look at the prevention, preserves, you know, of areas and habitats and heritage and everything of that nature, but equally, it can also be a bit of a failing approach to us to slow processes down. So, you know, there does need to be a bit of an overturn on the planning policies in regards to that, in my opinion, anyway. Certified systems. So many people are seeing change in the industry. Many now are coming to terms with embracing the change. But equally, it takes time to take solutions and concepts into the marketplace. My recent experience in the facade world evidently brought the tragedy of Grenfell to the construction industry, which now has brought significant change to people's investments of what they had in the marketplace, no longer deemed fit for use. So fire performances and certified systems, however, to actually put your system and get certification for these can take you 18 months, can take you 24 months, and roughly about £30,000–40,000 of investment. So the duration delays are causing a slow up as well in that. And an ever-changing regulation approach. So constantly improvement of homes is great, it's exactly what we want to have, but we go through a 24-month process to achieve the regulation. The regulation changes, and subject to then slight amendments to your solution, you have to go through a process again. So there has to be some sort of uniformity and synergy between what it is we're doing. And maybe that's because we need to look at the best case scenario, and we need to think for the future, as opposed to thinking about just achieving regulations as they stand today. So procurement rules are another process. Obviously, government-bodied money, public money. When it comes to a procurement process, and I understand there's a lot of people in the procurement chains, in tendering processes, in framework solutions. However, it also is a process of slowing down a prospective avenue, because there are people who know what they want. There are people willing to pay the price for what they need, and they can show that it's true value. However, you still have to go through a process, and a process comes at a cost and a delay. So again, I think, from a procurement rule perspective, there needs to be a little bit of a relaxation in that, especially when they're looking at modern method of construction. And as you can clearly see in capital letters, and I would love to hear if there are any insurance providers or mortgage lenders on the line. Generally, when we're out in the open, I can kind of scan and see or study. Today, I have absolutely no idea who's watching. So please feel free to fire at me anything you like. I've got broad shoulders. But the lending aspects and the uncertainties of MMC, I've experienced it many times. So we've had solutions in the marketplace now deemed MMC, but 10 years ago, they weren't a problem. They weren't a problem before modular housing, in effect, became a big word in the industry. Volumetric modular, again, it's all this definition of MMC. So what we then tend to find is the uncertainty knowledge of these lenders, who ultimately then will not lend against specific products unless they have various criteria. Even when they do have the criteria, there's still a little bit of a receptive nature. So underwriter changes to insurance, shared ownerships have a whole different complexity of their own right, and outright refusals to people who physically will not lend when it's a modern method of construction and it isn't a brick and block. So there are still many missing pieces, I believe, in the industry that we would really love a focus. We know that there's going to be a little bit of reshaping in the planning, but I'd like to see some sort of uniformity in these approaches that will just open doors a little bit quicker. So we've gone through decades of change and challenge with various different inventions. So we take the typical mobile phone, for example, and anyone who can understand that to use the latest iPhone is you're doing extremely well there. But we've moved on in significant advanced technologies. It's brought us here today doing a webinar to you across the line, as opposed to sitting in a room full of people, although I would much prefer that. The car. We've gone from the old-fashioned car, well, we've gone from the horse to the car, from the car to the electric car. So, what's next? If we look back to the future, we'll be on hoverboards, but we're moving on in that industry. So another revolutionized approach. But sadly, in the construction industry, we still feel that there's this approach that we were very much a masonry approach to construction. And we still today love those little clay things. So, and don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the traditional approach, because we need traditional construction. What we need to do is have a complementing construction approach with modern methods in order to be able to bridge the gap. So value decision making is quite key. And some of you, if you've online, and I have used this slide in a presentation before, but this is a typical example I like to use. I am also guilty of this. We go in and we make a value decision. We take our car into a petrol station and we have two pumps facing us. One of them is the standard unleaded or diesel pump, and the second one is premium. That premium allows them to add that 20 pence that litre on. However, how many really honestly pick up the premium? And that's purely down to the belief of the technology. So maybe we're not explained it in a right form, which is why potentially maybe modern methods of construction doesn't come up as well as value. Because as much as it is more expensive, that extra 20 pence that we put in, it may give us, as we should believe, the extra 50 miles in the tank that they suggest it do. And the fact that it cleanses your engine to stop you from regular visits from a long-term maintenance perspective of your engine. We'll go and pay the bill at the garage when we have to, because we have to. But what we won't do is we won't look at that value decision making when we're paying that extra 20 pence per litre to avoid that trip. So to me, yes, I will go and put the premium in when I next fill up. And I will have a bit more of a belief in that sector. But I certainly have the belief in our construction sector of some of the modern method of constructions that we look at. So going forward, we as again, within the constructing excellence, a lot of these questions really have come through the door about COVID and how is this now going to impact our industry going forward? What is it going to do? Is it going to be an increased demand for the labor resources and material manufacturing supply chains? Are we going to get back to a normal? Can we work side by side with our friends? So many different questions are being asked post-COVID. And I say post-COVID loosely because every day you wake up, you see another spike or you see another proposal that we might be going back into a stronger second phase. Let's hope not. But what we're needing to do is there's been significant loss of productivity during the COVID period, and of which obviously there are some sizable percentages. We all anticipated roughly what this would do to the economy as such, but from a construction industry, you know, clients are now suggesting that a downturn of about 40%, which is quite scary, and now going back to work, you know, the lack of productivity because of the provisions that has to be put in place with COVID. What comes with that as well is obviously increased costs. So I suppose the question being is, can the offsite and modern methods contribute to the expansion for that demand in the volume? So here we are faced with financial implications, you know, two-person tasks now being restricted, scaffolding widths, restricted areas, PPE, all these things, which I won't dwell on this, but we all know that we are faced with these choke points of how we have to ensure that our construction sites are safe and are ready to be worked, you know, by the labor resources in a safe manner, you know, but equally, every single one of these will come at an impact. So we're looking at overrun costs, we're looking at delays in deliveries, and again, we've still got that skill shortage, a material shortage. So this is really something that the putting the strain on traditional construction is going to cause. So from a modern methods of construction perspective, and I'd like to think there's many people who's probably viewed Mark Farmer's approach. So Mark obviously made, as a government advisor, clearly indicated 7 definition categories of modern methods of construction, which we'll just briefly run through. I would recommend obviously the Modernise or Die. I would recognise just reviewing just Mark's version of this in particular. It's definitely worth having a look, but there are many people who I've spoke to in the past who lack that understanding of what is actually available, because I think we do have a set in our way approach that we look at systems and solutions that we know and that we like, and that we just honour those. So offsite manufacturing, as I said, complement, not compete. So category 1 of that is an offsite solution. Now I say complement, not compete, because it is actually what it should be doing. We should be building houses, albeit we should be building them traditionally with skilled people, and we should be building them in numbers, absolutely. What we should also do is complement those builds to pick up the deficit with MMC, whether that be from category 1 to category 7. So we'll go through them and then you can see how they can work individually, or equally how holistically they can be put together in a collective nature. It all benefits in one way, shape, form or another. So we are looking to build high quality homes now for every sector of the marketplace. You know, we're not just looking at these. We want them for affordable houses. We want them for open market. We want them for build to rent. So specifically the build to rent market and the affordable rent, there's an absolute key for speed. You know, there is such a shortfall for that. So therefore it's probably the 2 sectors that these would benefit most in. But equally, as I said, they work in all the other aspects too. So then we move into the, so we've got category 1. So 3D volumetric is category 1. So we're looking at factory installed, you know, in a volumetric box is the easiest way to simplify the more technical approach to it. Then we come into category 2, which we are still looking at structural, and we're looking at 2D. So a panelization form, it could be pre-finished, or it just could purely be the structural core of the building. So again, that is in a number of different material fabrics. So we've got the concrete, the steel, the timber, CLT. But what we're doing is making large format panels that incorporate the structure of a building. So category 3, then we look at the components. So component materials are sort of pre-manufactured components, which could be anything from staircases to trusses to piles, or you know, insulated raft slab solutions that are manufactured in a factory environment, but they're not necessarily forming the structural elements of the externals, and they're a component incorporated within the buildings. So again, there's an additional category that you can bring into play. Then we've got the additive manufacturing. So again, it's structural or non-structural. So there are a number of different things now that come to the market. We've seen sort of 3D printing approaches. So we have solutions, and you've got additives that can maybe sort of strengthen, you know, concretes and other aspects. So again, it's another arm, another element of construction that maybe some of us on the site or other aspects don't look into as such. But equally, there are all these forms that are coming in supporting and complementing the world of traditional construction. And these are, again, they can be entwined into traditional construction, so that there is this sort of synergy between the two as well. It isn't just MMC or traditional. There are hybrid approaches where they can be accommodated into both. We've then got the category 5, so you've got non-structural assemblies, but again, pre-manufactured. So you could have a concrete frame or a steel frame building, and what you're doing is, on the left here, you've got a bathroom pod solution. So again, that's something that can be incorporated into a building, or you've got an infill panel, which is incorporated its external facade, its window, glazings and other aspects. So again, there are a number of different things that you can do from a non-structural perspective, which brings that into an additional category. So each of these are categorized, and I suppose maybe until such a time there is a tendering process or somewhat of another that scores your usage of MMC. I'm seeing MMC becoming more and more of a requirement, along with carbon savings. So you know, we may start moving from a world of cost-driven into more the efficiencies, and maybe there'll be a scoring element in the future. Who knows? So something I'm quite familiar with in my history of the last sort of 10 years is the traditional construction led now. So what this is bringing you in is items that can be incorporated. So obviously we struggle with the brick slips, or struggle with the bricks, sorry. So we've got brick slip solutions now. And again, a lot of these brick slip solutions have had significant investment put into them, from a durability assessment through certification and through sort of fire ratings. So I think a report previously suggested for the 1 million homes, we needed something like 1.6 billion bricks, to which we could only achieve about 650 million. So that kind of brings into perspective, are we ever going to be able to build that 1 million homes with traditional products? Well, even if we did have the material, we certainly wouldn't have the labor resources to be able to. So we have to incorporate a lot of these solutions. And as I said, they can be done on a perspective of whether or not it's one, two, or many of them that complement what you can achieve at the end of that. So you've got large format blocks on a masonry perspective. Again, it's the crossover maybe between a traditional form to the hybrid in a nature. You're using advanced technologies, thin joint mortar, stronger systems, to other offsite flooring substructure solutions and large format roofing systems. So again, it's knowing what's in the marketplace and what's available for use, and how you can incorporate that into your development, whether it's of the housing sector or the commercial sector or anything of that nature. And then you've got your site process led in a way. So category 7 brings more of the digital approach. So again, you've got maybe robotics in regards to bricklaying, which can increase productivity. And then you've got things such as the AR and the VR, and obviously the BIM. So these are just kind of things. Now, if you bring those 7 together, you know, volumetric is kind of one as a whole. They tend to bring in a digital approach anyway. But equally, you can start bringing categories 2 and 6 and including others. So it's how you look at these categories and how you feel you can bring them into an organization, and how you then deem that as utilization of modern methods of construction. So advantages, I mean, you know, there are many advantages. You know, we have this shortage, as we said, so it brings in a different trade, it brings in a different skill set, and therefore these trades are available. So you get that increased productivity. Ultimately, with increased productivity, you get a reduction of your build times as well. You get your reduction in prelims. Purely the increased productivity brings you off-site a lot quicker. It's better quality. I mean, if your factory environment installed, you're working in, you know, under shelter. So you do get enhanced quality with that, which brings fewer defects then to completion handovers. they are less susceptible to weather. Some of these systems you can apply, they're dry fix solutions because the majority have been manufactured, whether it's been panel formation or they're designed to be a dry fix system. So there are lots of things out there and that are less susceptible to weather, and we all know that that can change in an instant. You tend to get more cost certainty, more reliability on that front, so you do get cost certainty. There are a lot of reductions in the CO2 emissions. Minimal disturbances to the surrounding areas, maybe as well from a planning perspective. You know, the use of modular, it's daunting to some people, but actually when you're looking at maybe 70% reduction in site work, but ultimately most of that is picked up in the factory, you've got controlled health and safety environmental happening in the factory, and equally you're building quicker schemes, allowing you to do more as an organization each, but it has less impact as well on the surrounding neighborhood. There's a lot of certified test data you know, that comes with these systems. Equally at this moment, everybody is putting their solutions through vigorous testing, whether that's a 60-year durability or advancing to 75s and 100s you're hearing. So there's an extreme amount of test data available now for new technologies, whereas we don't have anything really other than a grandfather rights for what we've done for masonry as well. So we're building quicker, therefore we're handing these homes on quicker, which is bringing in increased revenues. You get a better return on your capital investments, and it's just a simplified process really of the procurement routes, because you've in certain circumstances one trade fits all. Reduction in waste, that's all handled from a recyclability perspective. So again, there are many of these benefits that can modern methods of construction can bring to developments, but what comes with advantages also comes with barriers. So there is a lack of investment in a way to modern methods of construction, and I think because of the uncertainty of people's embracement of the use of it. So there is high capital cost needed for an offsite manufacturer, for instance, and that investment is very volatile if you don't have commitment. But how do you get the commitment if you're governed in procurement routes, which doesn't give you that sort of that right to securing that pipeline? You need a secure pipeline for volumetric. So, you know, it is probably out of the categories, it is the most the risky element to take, because it is high costs up front, but there is long-term gains. And I think somebody recently put Usain Bolt made about £120 million, I think it was, for running 120 seconds. But actually he put in 20 years worth of work to get that. So, you know, that's the commitment really that you got to look for in this market. So we've got a lack of knowledge, we've got a lack of expertise, we've got a lack of experience. In the UK we have reached out. There are many others. This is obviously, we're all familiar with Urban Splash probably, and their sort of Sekisui home now, they've connected with them. So we look out to the overseas for experience, and again, that should be welcomed in addition to what we are trying to create here in the UK. So we're looking at prototypes, so people will make the commitment, okay, yeah, we can do that because we can call it a prototype. But again, that's not giving the commitment that these MMC manufacturers, supply chains and volumetric providers need. So they do need that absolute commitment. And then you look at the cost, and I mean, it's the biggest swear word I think in this industry, but yeah, it's an unfavorable comparison. We can't compare unless we are looking at this as a whole commercial approach. So a typical example will come up about costs shortly, but we don't tend to, we look at it from a quantity surveying perspective, but we've got to really take that overall commercial review of what it is we're doing. So the other, we are reluctant to change. Familiarity with some people, they want to stick to what they know. We do have an aging population of the construction industry, and not necessarily these guys of 30 years experience want a whippersnapper coming in out of college, who then knows more about a certain modern method of construction than they do. However, we have to encourage the youth into our industry. We have to bring these people on board, and what they do is bring a new skill, they bring new technologies. And it will bring enhanced performances with younger generation. So we need to have that belief. We need to then get some accurate data so that we can then have that confidence in that data. We need to sort the lending routes out. The barriers to these lending routes are shocking, and you know, we need to have a bit more of a uniformed recognition in modern method of construction And as long as it meets the criteria, we can go through the lending. If you can't get lending on it, it immediately puts off a developer or a prospector in order to build in that form. So that's the negative perception that we've got. Local availability, again, it is another thing that potentially, you know, we don't have things on our doorstep that ultimately we want, but we may have a bit of resource in local labour. But we need to look at the scale. We scale up, we have huge design work, and then we have the changes, as I said, in regulations. So we need to look at the flexibility and standardization for that scalability. So again, we've got great advantages, but we've also got barriers, and maybe it's how we look at the industry and who helps and how it's supporting in overcoming such barriers, in getting more belief in the use of the modern method of construction. So just throwing up a few examples now. So we've got a volumetric approach, as we said. So, you know, there are people, we're not looking now at, you know, what is today's building regulations. I'm working alongside somebody who we are looking at the future homes. We are looking at the Part Ls. We are looking at the renewable energies. We are thinking about the long-term investment. So, and it isn't just us thinking about it in the technology of what it is you build. It's the housing association's embracement to actually look at it and think, this is going to be a home in our housing stock for many years to come. We want to maybe pay that little bit of an extra price now. We want to be green. We want to be efficient. We want our customers, our tenants, in order to live in these houses at minimal costs. So there are a lot of people now who are factoring in this in their costings, which again, as I said, as an example to traditional construction, it's a very unfavorable example when the technologies are much, much greater and performances are far more advanced than some of the traditional elements that we are building to. So from a time perspective, you know, again, what it allows you, a simple approach, the red box there, offsite manufacturing has the ability to be built in a factory environment whilst site preparation and civils infrastructure work is taking place. Obviously, a development of the superstructure cannot take place in traditional construction until it has a substructure in place. So by doing so, this gives savings of up to 50% in certain circumstances. There have been other occasions where this could be greater, purely because of relocations of sites and not having the ability to access a site until such a time. Well, if you've got that commitment and you've got that in line with your client, you can build the factories and potentially store them ready for work to take. So everything all about is advancing the speed of construction without the detriment of the quality of the product that's going to be on the site at the end. Then you've got, obviously, other brands are available. So if there's anybody out there in the steel worlds and the volumetric worlds and everything else, then obviously I'm just making demonstrations here. But you then got the option of having a lightweight structural solution. So you don't have to incorporate traditional concrete structures, steel structures. The technologies today and the engineering involved in this is allowing light gauge steel frame with hot rolled steel columns to take the weight load, so that actually you're building, I mean, this one in particular can go up to 9 stories without the need of a structural steel frame as such, because the incorporation of your hot rolled steel and the engineering performances within. So again, it just shows that ability. These can come in panels, these can come in stick form. So it just brings that little bit of difference to your development. You can obviously achieve fire ratings with this, 9 stories, obviously over 18 meters high. So you can have full through wall fire testing, and then you can incorporate lightweight facades as you finish. You've got a concrete options. You know, this is a concrete closed panel, sit panel approach. So, you know, you go from CGI at the top to the construction development at the bottom within a 12-week period. Ultimately, there's obviously a lot of manufacturing behind the scenes of that. However, it's a rapid approach of standardization, a residential approach to panelized. And again, it's just one of those many solutions out there in the marketplace that some people are unfamiliar with at this moment in time. We've got CLT, Andrew's favorite, timber. So again, we got timber frame, paneled structures, panel flooring solutions. You know, there's panel party walls and partition walls and everything that comes of it. But yet you drive past a building with a traditional brick external facade. Is it brick or is it an innovative cladding solution? The beauty of it is these things are very hard to identify these days. So it just goes to show that the technologies of modern methods are really complementing traditional construction, but there are a lot of them that are contemporary as well and are meant to look different. And then we've got infill panels. So you got, again, another approach, and this is adopted quite widely in the student accommodation world with Watkin Jones. So you have your traditional construction, you have your traditional concrete frame solution, your RC frame, and then you're applying a SIP panel solution within that's very highly insulated, and it's all manufactured to suit the design. So again, it's all about offsite manufacturing, speeding up the on-site processes. A lot of these things can also eliminate the requirements of scaffolding. Apologies if there's any scaffolders out there, but you can be working from obviously the internal floor slabs, platform-based. Again, it's all about eliminating maybe the use of that, and then you can get on with external works obviously much quicker also. So you have structures, and then you have things like facades. So again, we're unfamiliar with the fact that we can achieve a render, we can achieve the brick, we can achieve the stone. All of these can be achieved in veneers and cladding forms, whether they're man-made or whether they're in a traditional material. So there are lots of options out there available that can complement and be put together. So a couple of examples here, we're looking at, there's no limitation, an acrylic brick slip on the left-hand side that we done for Bristol many years ago. Bristol have adopted their overcladding solution to incorporate a brick skyline now, and they brought in a design of bringing trees to the gable elevation. So it just goes to show you can brick slip by numbers now and bring some sort of unique designs into play. And again, we've got a traditional place panelized cladding approach on the right-hand side. So there's a lot of adoption of MMC that people are unaware of. Then we've got stone, man-made stone on the left, natural granite type stone on the right. But again, these are timber frame buildings here, and they have a board solution creating a cavity, and then they have the desired finishes. Not a single product on these buildings really are of what we would deem a traditional product. To do the traditional stonework, very expensive, very time consuming. However, obviously we drew in cost savings through the product, through the labor, and then the overall time savings on the contract. So it all stacks up. And then people say with MMC, you take away character with a building. We don't have to. So on the very bottom of that left image, you can see the tired, despaired nature of a traditional detail and architecture, but yet above it's been replicated in a modern method way. So a very lightweight, durable profile. So you can replicate things through digital design, through CNC cutting. And again, on the parapet on the right-hand side, that is also made out of a similar product. So very lightweight solutions, but bring character to a building. So just because it isn't traditional doesn't mean you can't make it look pretty. So to give you an example, I can see there's a few questions coming in, and I don't want to bore the life. Thankfully, there's nobody dropped off, so we're doing okay. But as an example, on a scheme I've worked on, and this just brings modern methods in a hybrid approach. So we've got 95 units. They're built in timber frame construction using a lightweight facade. Immediately, if you was to compare that to a conventional build, block sand and cement renders versus this lightweight option, would show that the sand and cement option would be about £500 in the superstructure per dwelling cheaper. So immediately people would rush off because that's the approach. However, we then took a review at what we require in the substructure because there's no structural support for this facade. And we saved £1,800 per plot in the substructure. So again, just bringing that look of sub and super together made the solution more viable and a good cost saving. We brought in a single trade solution who took it from the timber frame to the outer finish. There isn't multiple trades of mason work and then renderers and then painters and decorators. So taking traditional trades off the critical path, the build time to watertight was roughly about 5 weeks. So scaffolding was up and down and external works were then starting to take place. So phase one was handed over 35 weeks ahead of their original traditional program. It overall increased their tender margins by 4.5%. So their aspired margin was increased to what they actually achieved. And they, by doing so, obviously 200,000 of that was a reduction in their prelims through the time savings. It adds a major social benefit to the housing association, who now have homes readily available for a long awaited list. And to them, it brings in an early revenue as well. So, and that was increased by in excess of 300,000. So there now is a 200,000 prelim reduction and a 300,000 revenue increase. There's £500,000 worth of value that could not be assessed when somebody was looking at the comparison between block work and traditional facade. So that's why they become unfavorable unless you really take that holistic view of the approach that you are taking for the use of modern method of construction. So just to give you some examples, I mean, if many of you should be Southwest based, that you would be driving around the country and seeing a lot of schemes. So this isn't just schemes that are that have just been dropped sporadically. There have been thousands of units that have been used. I mean, a typical example there on the top right, that is registered passive house scheme down in Cornwall many years ago, before the MMC and offsite words came into the industry. Now, from a client's perspective, the perception of the using solutions of this kind didn't go down well, didn't want to use it. Design and build led them down this road to the clients was unaware. So having asked the client then what he thought about the building, and it was deemed one of the best constructions that they had within their housing stock, we then advised that obviously of the technologies that we use. So it kind of goes to show as well that, as clients, our clients are aware what they're getting in design and build, and actually clients need to go out and specify the use of modern methods and of energy efficiency measures and passive standards. And then more of us will be utilizing products and achieving developments of this kind. So in want of a better way, modern method of construction is a bright future. I see it. We know it's government backed. We know it needs to be adopted and endorsed. How and in what definition and in what category you do that is entirely up to each organization. But I would absolutely recommend that people do explore the avenues within each organization in order for us to be able to try and achieve anywhere close to the government need of houses. So I will now shut up. Thank you very much for listening and not dropping off. And if you've just been polite enough to leave yourselves there and just run off anyway, then that's fine. But I do see that we have a few questions. So I'm more than happy to have a run through. Or Howard, John, if you want to lead the way on that.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Perhaps you can stop sharing your screen, Dan. That's all right. And then we will then, or I can stop sharing it for you. That's great. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Dan. That was a phenomenal run through, brilliant overview. So yeah, we've got about a quarter of an hour. Got some questions. It's really quite nice when we bring people onto the panel to ask the question. So if you've asked a question, feel free to put your hand up. There's a button putting your hand up, and if your hand is up, we'll bring you onto the panel, and you can ask them in person. That's always quite nice. Perhaps just while they're putting their hands up, Dan, is in the actual comments section, there's a number of comments coming in. If you have a quick look at there.
That's good. I can see you. Well done, Dan. That was fantastic. So thanks, Mum.
Brilliant. So there's a hand up already, so I'll just bring in some people and we'll take it from there. So let's just see who we've got here. Yeah, great. Thank you very much, guys. So I'll bring in all the people in the panel. You can come in and then when I turn your camera on, and then you'll be able to sort of ask a question. So I'll just bring those through now. And perhaps then we'll take as they come.
Yeah, I'm just seeing a couple of comments there, and obviously I'd anticipated it, so it's not a problem. So Robert Chapman, yes, obviously suggested if we don't have planning, then we have a lot of crap build. And absolutely, as I said, there are barriers. There's the flaws of it, I suppose, being too rigid in a way, but it can't be too relaxed either. You're absolutely right. So there is that protection, as we said, of the prevention and of developments in sort of heritage and habitats and green spaced areas, and making sure planners do that. But yeah, ultimately, I think we all realise that there is a process change, and we know the government are looking into that, which is great. How it changes will be yet to be decided. But
brilliant. Yeah. Okay, Dan. So So we'll perhaps run through the questions. Luke, you were first, I think. So if you want to turn off mute and come in, it'd be great to hear your question. And we'll all have to be quite disciplined because we've got just about 15 minutes or so. So great.
Perfect. Well, afternoon, everybody. And Dan, thank you for that. That's appreciated. I'm not sure if you have an answer to this, but I've been working development for about 15 years now. I've done one off-site scheme about 10 years ago. It's never taken hold in our country for some reason. Unfortunately, over my 15 years, I've seen a lot of off-site manufacturing businesses appear and then unfortunately disappear. I'm wondering, and this is, I think, probably all of us as well, what can we all do in the industry? Because we know from a financial, from a risk point of view, from a training opportunity point of view, it delivers a lot of good outcomes. What do we think we can all do as an industry to help promote this, this type of solution?
Yeah, good question. Good question. Yeah, thanks, Luke. Didn't you have a coffee to make? No, it's a great. What can we do? I mean, that is the thing, really. I mean, education is one thing. We educate the marketplace on what we do. You know, some people don't know what's available. I have given a couple of presentations, and somebody was dumbfounded that you could actually achieve even on-site MMC of what's available than just the factory environments. But as I said, you know, we got these barriers, and we need to work together as an industry to overcome the barriers. And obviously, as part of the Constructing Excellence Southwest, it's something that we do talk about a lot. You know, I sit on the board with a few colleagues that are here with me today, actually. So yeah, what can we do? I mean, we need to embrace, we need to look beyond the initial costs. Maybe it needs to be sort of sector driven first of all. Potentially clients need to be sort of stipulating what it is they want, and not just putting something out there in the domain and get what they're given. However, if we are being controlled, I suppose, by developments, significant developments, and then they're sort of having to buy sort of Section 106 units, you get what you're given then. But no, I'd love somebody else to come in and actually answer that question. You know, what we're doing here today, it's just sharing knowledge. So I think
Perhaps,
more.
Perhaps Emma could come in on this one. She's someone who's probably Emma, you've
yeah, I was going to say, as a client who literally has adopted the top level for passive standards, then who better than Emma Osmondson to give us the answer to that?
Do you know, Dan, this has been such a good presentation, because I've always been quite about the modular route, in so much as what I've seen in the UK has always disappointed me. And I think, you know, you've really clearly articulated the potential. And I think the question is, you know, why are we slow on the uptake here? And I think it's because we haven't been ambitious enough. And certainly from a client's perspective, I think we need to be a lot more demanding, and at the same time a lot more specific in terms of what our wishes, our wants are from the modular, in terms of a modular solution. I mean, from what I've heard today, and it's something that I have got ambitions to go down a modular route in terms of meeting the number of homes that we need locally in Exeter, but also speeding things up. But it's the quality. And from what I've seen in the UK to date, in terms of prefabrication and modularisation, I haven't been convinced what I've seen in factories has been born in terms of quality. What I've seen for myself firsthand has been a de-skilling of people and a dumbing down of materials that, whilst you might have warranties attached with their homes, I would certainly question their longevity when you look at other traditional forms of construction. So I think there are things that we can do, but I would like to, you know, challenge you, Dan, to give me a modular solution of what we're already building under the slow traditional route. Because if you can do it, and the nearest we've got to seeing what we like is based in Germany, then, you know, we've got a pipeline of 1,000 homes that we desperately need. And if you can cut probably 2 years off our programme, then that's got to be good news for the people that we need to house in the city. So,
yeah. No, and we'll probably take that discussion offline as well. I mean, the one thing that I have done, I think, and it has frustrated me, is seeing the approach. You have the frustrations. We have the financial capital behind Legal and General. They have an amazing facility, the biggest in the UK. But what they don't have is that pipeline commitment from the client side. They can do 3,500 homes. Can we get those 3,500 homes through planning? Can we logistically get those 3,500 homes down the motorway road connections to get them from A to B? So all of these different things, you know, there are so many different aspects to look at. My approach has been all of these changing processes. So as you say, I've now, with the offsite side of things, I've taken a different route. We work selectively. And I'd like to think there would be a number of people who would do this on a scale as well. So instead of trying to look at the entire marketplace, you work with embraced clients who are willing, who are committed, and you put the technologies into these homes, which they are willing to just make that little bit of extra capital investment into now, knowing that it's going to be a building for them for the next 60 to 100 years, whatever the durations of certification and things that are wanted on these. So we are bringing in mass renewable technologies. You know, we're bringing in fabric. We're looking at that. We're looking at the thermal mass. So we're looking at every aspect and saying, do you know what? We're going to bring that into our modular home. Yes, it's going to be a bit more expensive now, but you will reap the rewards of it in the end. So maybe the more people that we can look at achieving these standards, you know, we have the future standards that are on their way coming out. And if everybody is looking at these future standards and developing in that way and forgetting about the cost, then maybe we will move over the line that little bit quicker.
Thanks very much. Ash, do you want to come in with your question?
Yes, good afternoon. Dan, thank you ever so much. What a passionate display there. And I'm sure if you had 4 hours to fill, you would have done so. And please take that comment in the right way.
I could talk, Ash, that's right.
My question to you is whether you have any thoughts on how we may derive a formula to establish the level of MMC adopted on projects. And whilst I give you a second to consider that, I'll give you a scenario for when that might be useful. So when I'm a project manager, by the way, so when we work alongside clients who may be interested in adopting MMC and perhaps want to stitch that into their project briefs, is there a standard that they would look to achieve for MMC as perhaps a KPI? And would that standard be similar to your BREEAM approach, perhaps, whether there would be levels that you could achieve?
Yeah, again, they're all good questions. And they're all things that need to be looked at. And the question is, who looks at them and where do these go in order for them to be really considered? And as I said earlier, the categories of farmers' definitions, if you were to score them, ultimately you would start with 1 being the highest scoring rating down to 7. But yeah, actually, you know, why would we distinguish digital, the use of digital construction, not as equally or as good as volumetric? But yeah, I think there does need to be a scoring system, especially on a tender. And recently, I'm looking at a bid, Exeter based, and it's very well documented that MMC is a big requirement. So how is that going to be scored? So maybe that's a good starting point that I can have a look into, is finding out from the client themselves, who ultimately have written the bid requirements, is how are they going to score the MMC approach to the bids that are coming in. So yeah, Ash, I mean, I will ask that question. I'm not actually saying I'm going to get an answer, but I'll do my best to try and get an answer, and I'd love to share that answer with you. So, but I think it's an absolute fantastic idea, and I think something will happen. Like I said, I was hearing of protocols to try and take place for recognition, for one, so that an insurance provider or a mortgage lender would be able to recognize a standard, and from that standard, they would have the confidence that these products or processes have gone through the necessary due diligence in order to ensure that they are fit for use and they have that longevity. So I'm still waiting to see that of what's happened, and that's probably been 18 months or more in development. So these things don't happen overnight, but yeah, I think maybe if client, again, MSO, I keep coming back to you, but as a client, if we can assess maybe a scoring system from a client's perspective and how they grade the use of MMC along the side of quality, along the side of cost, then yeah, maybe that could be put into tenders or frameworks.
Brilliant. Dan, we've just got 2 questions in the chat box, and also conscious of Robert's still here. So Robert, I don't know if you want to ask a question. If not, Dan, if you could just pick those straight up from the Q&A button.
Is that Robert as in Robert Chapman?
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, I'm just about to shoot off for a run, so I haven't got my camera on, but you can see me, I think. Actually, I just wanted to congratulate you, first of all, Dan. That's a fantastic presentation. I'm a kind of strategic advisor in the commercial arena, but as someone who understands, I think, holistically, regeneration in the widest sense, I think housing is fundamentally important, and we need to get on and deliver more. There were some thoughts that I just wanted to share with you, and they're not necessarily questions, but you may want to respond, and I'll be very quick. I think the product needs to be climate resilient. I think I take your point absolutely about the certainty of quantum, and that is a challenge because that links to procurement. I think there is something about smart planning. I'm a great believer in planning being a force for good. It shouldn't be seen as a negative. And if there's a problem with planning, let's get planning resourced. Actually, let's have an urban designer in planning because we don't want crap builds. Forgive me for being pejorative, but we want quality construction. There's something there about valuation and finance. I'm a chartered surveyor. I'm not a registered valuer, but I think I'm familiar with the issues. And there's a big issue around valuation of product and finance. And I think registered valuers, correct me if I'm wrong, have a challenge with MMC. And there's something there, there's a connection between valuation and finance. And my final point is around skills. Of course, what we need now are modern day skills, which move beyond, with absolute respect, the kind of manual labor, which is absolutely great. But what we need now are modern day skills, which are digital skills, which take place in a digital arena to create the products you're talking about.
No, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more, Robert. And as you say, you know, it's smart planning. It is absolutely great. I think a lot of people's frustration is the timescales and sort of, you know, sometimes the rejections of planning on really no grounds and benefits of solutions being used in a modern method way. Maybe it's not understood. So yeah, I mean, all taken on, yeah, the quantum side of things, climate resilience. So there's a lot of people who are looking. Obviously, BOPAS is a very big name from a durability assessment. So obviously not to be confused with an insurance aspect of it all, but the assessment of durability, you know, is looking at 60 years. They're expanding that out to ever. So you have that, you kind of look at the climate. I suppose people do and take that assessment, and we as Constructive Excellence have looked at it with the Extinction Revolution, where they come on board and give a very in-depth about the climate change and how that's impacting and what we can do as an organization actually to alleviate that as well. So it isn't about the climate change in how it's going to be, it's what we can also do that ultimately brings that down. So modern day skills, definitely. It was nice to see as well. There's obviously a pot of money coming out for the youth, for training, you know, to triple capacities in the traineeships, and then to triple capacities in the work academy placements, and then you're looking at doubling the amount of coaches. So I really welcome. Obviously, that's not our industry. That's just the UK as a whole, but I'd like to think that there will be a lot of approach to that. And again, within CE, we look at that with trying to bring on, we've done adopt the school programs to try and encourage the youth to come into our industry. And obviously what they bring with them is that different skill set, which we should welcome. I think sometimes we're just a little bit afraid.
Okay, thanks, Dan. We've drawn to a close of an hour. So I know there's a number of people who've got questions and etc. What I would suggest is perhaps you may like to pick up directly with Dan, if that's okay with you, Dan.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem at all.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'd like to draw this to close because people do have other things to do. So I'd like to thank you all for what for the questions you brought, but more importantly to Dan, who's brought an awful lot of interesting things to highlight. But more importantly, his absolute enthusiasm. On Friday, and Emma, if she's still with us, may be interested, we have MMC from the Welsh Government perspective, looking at this. So if you're interested in this, please do register for Friday, when we can look at this from the experience and particularly what the Welsh Government are looking for it. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. And this session has been recorded. So if you'd like to listen to it again, you can get that at leadersmeets.com. Where do you register? Visit leadersmeets.com, where you'll be able to register for Friday's event. Dan is also going to post his presentation online, so that'll be available again for people to watch again, or indeed you can actually recommend other people to come and look at this. And I'd like to thank Dan for his time and he's what I think has been a really interesting session. Thank you very much, Dan.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been great. And thanks to you all for listening.
Thanks, Dan.
And thanks to everyone for logging in. Have a great day and see you on Friday. Thank you very much indeed.
Take care. All the best.
Bye. Are you still there, Dan? I think he's gone.
A lot of really good questions in the so I'll just make sure we capture those ones that we didn't get asked. See if we can get back to them afterwards, Howard.
Yeah, because I think we've got the names with the people.
Yeah, we have, yeah.
Dan said he'd send a PDF, so you should have that later on.